is the Happy Scientist Podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, this is Nick Oswald welcoming you to this Bitesize Bio webinar, which today is a live episode of the Happy Scientist podcast. As we always say, if you want to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist, you are in the right place. With me, of course, is the Bitesize team's Yoda, our Confucius, or Mr. Miyagi, Mr. Kenneth Vogt. In these sessions, we hear from Ken mostly on principles that will help shape you for a happier and a more successful career. And along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist and from working with Ken. During this, doing this live, Ken, takes me back to when we started the Happy Scientist podcast back in March 2020, when lots of people had to begin working from home for the first time in their lives. And we decided to launch a Happy Scientist webinar to help them cope with that. That eventually morphed into a podcast. And here we are today, 62 episodes later, on today's topic, which will be the most effective way to expand and protect your own interests. It's come a long way, Ken.
Yeah, it sure has. And it was funny, too, the way, as you mentioned, the way it started, people were just aching for, what do I do? And, it was understandable. People had been in the lab their whole career, and all of a sudden now they're supposed to work from home. It didn't even make sense, it seemed, but you all worked it out. We're proud of y'all. You did fine. You took care of yourself, and great. So now I want to talk more about that idea of taking care of yourself, taking care of your own interests. We do want you to be able to expand your career, and we want you to be happy and effective as you do it. The question about that is, though, how do you protect yourself? Because even though there's a lot of cooperation in science, there is also some competition. And even if it's good-natured competition, there's competition for resources, competition for attention. There's all kinds of things that you need to worry about that have to do with your own interests. And you may be wondering, well, if I don't worry about it, who will? So we can start off then with this idea of, is it all about me? You may remember Emperor Cusco from The Emperor's New Groove, and he was so self-absorbed, so narcissistic, so selfish that, everything was a disaster for him. I mean, he got turned into a llama. It's terrible. And you may remember, too, if you're old enough, back in the 80s. In the 80s, there was actually a book called Looking Out for Number One. It was a bestseller, personal achievement, self-help kind of book. Looking Out for Number One. I mean, it's almost a rude comic. But, here's the thing. It's not the 80s anymore. And the notion of looking out for number one isn't old school. It's old hat. Because, frankly, the 80s proved that didn't work very well. If you made it all about yourself and you assumed everybody else would make it all about themselves, everybody's got to take care of number one, themselves being number one. It just didn't come together. And in a field like bioscience, where cooperation is truly necessary, you can see how that couldn't work. It didn't work. It didn't work in all kinds of different places. It didn't work in education. It didn't work in business. And it sure wasn't going to work in the lab. But here's the thing. If you're not looking out for you, who is? I mean, how do you take care of yourself if no one else is going to make me a priority? Well, don't I have to make me a priority? So that's the first thought we may have. Now, so we can then ask the question, if it then is serving others versus serving yourself, how do you make that work? I need to have some kind of card up my sleeve. I got to have some way of making sure I'm taking care of myself if I'm in a situation where it's versus. But the thing is, you don't necessarily have to be selfish to take care of yourself. And the reason you don't have to be selfish to take care of yourself is this card up the sleeve that I'm going to talk about here as we go on. So bear with me a moment. Let me make the case for the fact that you don't have to circle the wagons around your own little kingdom to make sure you're safe. You don't have to put up the drawbridge. You don't have to put in a moat. None of that stuff. You can be engaged with others, and yet you're still going to serve yourself. So does that sound desirable? I hope the answer is yes.
Is that for me?
So,
yes.
All right. So, but now let's start off with the fun part. Why serve yourself? Why should you do this? Why should you bother to take care of yourself? Well, yeah, because at first blush you may think, well, wouldn't that just be selfish, or maybe myopic, or is that being too limited in my view? But you really do have to take care of yourself, because as we mentioned earlier, they did get the one thing right in the 80s. If you don't take care of yourself, nobody else probably will. So it's got to be in the mix. But the fact is, you can't demand others respect you if you don't first respect yourself. So sometimes people just give themselves away, and they can't understand why people don't reciprocate. Well, because you've demonstrated that you're of no value. Why should they treat you as being of value? So let me add on to that then. What about the other side? Well, if I need to take care of myself, why should I be bothering to serve others? I mean, doesn't serving others fatally deplete you? But here's the thing. Serving others actually serves you. And now that may sound like a contradictory statement, but it's not. As you serve others, you see how to serve yourself. When you take care of things that will matter to other people, you will get clarity about what matters to you. You will also see, well, I see what I need in this situation. And it tells you how to ask for the things you need, because whereas people may not be thinking about you and putting you first, they're not all monsters. If you let them know what you need, if you communicate about that, well, then they have the chance to serve your needs. And they realize too that if you're doing things for their benefit, and now you turn around and say, and by the way, I would like some help on this, you can see people snap to on that. Like, oh yeah, I should do that because this guy's really good to me. I want to make sure he keeps doing that. So, he wants this little thing. Well, sure, I'm going to help with that. So that's why you should also be serving others in support of serving yourself. So I hear you chomping at the bit back there, Nick.
No, I'm just thinking of, as if we're trying to put this into a lab setting, and I suppose it's a vicious circle, can easily be set up. Whereas if you get a bunch of people and they're mostly serving only themselves, then people will tend to be more protective, and then that's a downward spiral, isn't there?
Exactly.
And so even if you're in a scenario where that feels like it's the case, you can be part of setting that spiral upwards by just kind of going against the flow, being helpful, and sticking out as the person who wants to help other people. Mm-hmm. And then they're more likely to help you. So it does serve you in the end. It's not completely, as you said earlier, it's not completely giving yourself away. It's right. And it's also not doing it with the requirement to that other people serve you back. It's just being of service, and then it will just naturally flow back the way, I guess.
Exactly. And you might think, well, I'm too junior in the operation for that to work. There's no such thing. It doesn't matter. It will cause you to stand out. So, I mean, that's support of your career just right there. if nobody helps you, but you have the reputation of being the person who helps everyone, that's still going to be good for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to look at it too. It's like you can get what's good for you, maybe in way number one, but maybe not way number two, or maybe way number one is not available, but there's another way that it could be of some value to you. So don't necessarily look at this to win all the time, because this isn't about winning and losing. And that kind of brings me to my next point. You've probably heard the term life is a zero-sum game. And that came from economics. The idea being that there's a pie to divide up, and once it's divided up, all the pieces are passed out. That's it, it's gone. And therefore, I want more of the pie. But if I get more of the pie, then you get less of the pie. And everybody's jockeying for position on that. The thing about it is that is even not necessarily true in economics, but it is certainly not true in life. But it is compelling, this idea that there are limited resources and the pool is finite. But what that is a scarcity point of view. And now there are certain things that are scarce. There may be a very expensive piece of equipment in your lab that you literally have to book time on, because it could, there's only 24 hours in a day that it can be used, and if you don't get on the schedule, you don't get to use it. Now, you might look at that and say, see, that proves it's a zero-sum game. Like, no, it's a zero-sum game for that piece of equipment. But that's not the whole picture. So, and there are still ways to do deals with that. If you come to somebody and say, I really need this resource, and they tell you, well, my suggestion to you is book that 2 weeks in advance, because that generally it's open for that long. Great. You can follow that advice. Or you can let it and go, okay, I didn't have the opportunity to do that, but maybe I can negotiate with somebody who's already got it booked. And again, it comes down to, okay, well, what can I do for you so that you can do this thing for me? Yeah, it still works out. You still have the opportunity. A lot of it comes down to your what kind of thinking you bring to it. If you bring an abundant way of thinking to whatever you're dealing with in a situation, you will find that things that looked finite get bigger, and sometimes they no longer look finite, or at least from a practical standpoint, they're no longer finite. It's like, I will be able to have access to X whenever I want. I can get, Sally Joe or Billy Bob to help me on any project anytime I want, because I've put in the lead time to make sure that they're available to me. And whether that lead time has to do with, well, they're interns, and I just gotta make sure the person who staffs interns is friendly to me, or maybe it's about, okay, these are experienced people, but because I have sowed the seeds of them wanting to keep me happy, that well, then you have access to those kind of resources. And sometimes you got to put in a fair amount of effort into that. Sometimes you have to cultivate relationships. Sometimes you have to pay up front, even well in advance, to get someone to pay you back later. But if you prepare for times when you're going to have needs, then you'll have that to call on when an emergency arises, or when you really need to have all hands on deck for something. You got to get in front of that stuff. And again, you might look at that and go, well, that's not serving me. I got to do all this extra work up front. It is absolutely serving you. And on top of that, it's serving others, because you're paying in service to others, so as to have a place to withdraw service to self after the fact.
It's quite a balance, though, isn't it? There's quite a nuance here to this, because if you set out to serve others just so you can get service back, then it's not going to work, because then people feel that's manipulating the situation.
Right. Yeah, you have to legitimately serve others.
It's an orientation. It's be open to helping, and you know those people. I can think of people I know that are like that. It's being open to helping, and it's being open to, look after yourself, but also be open to looking after the people that are around you. Being open to that, and then what you're talking about here, the benefit back, is a side effect of that. It's not the reason you do it.
It's not the primary objective.
Yeah. Okay.
You still see that serving others should be part of the mix for you, the mix for you too. It's valuable to you to be that way, and you can't fake it. You can't like, hey, didn't I bring donuts last week? Therefore, you owe me 5 hours worth of work this week.
Yeah, it's funny. I have seen so many people around me doing that, where they go, "Well, I've been putting in for ages, and they help and then they, at some point, they don't feel like they're getting back what they think they should for what they've put in, and they don't like it. But that's not the way to look at it, because the way it's coming back to you might not be the way you expect.
Right. Exactly. And two, it could come down to you. You might think, I have been silently giving and giving and giving, but if nobody really knows about it, nobody's really noticed, maybe the problem is you didn't communicate it. Maybe you didn't let people know that, hey, I've been doing this for your benefit. Do you find it a benefit? Because sometimes you think you're doing something to benefit for others, and when you ask them about it, they're like, I really don't care about that.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't really help me. Well, now you think you've been paying in, you're not paying anything in.
Yeah, that's interesting. Or you're not making clear what you want. Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah. It's a kind of soft focus sort of thing. This, isn't it? As so many of these things are.
Well, and this doesn't have to be all that hard. This isn't hocus pocus here, because it just comes down to bothering to think about things from someone else's perspective, and bothering to communicate to make sure that your picture was correct. It's just like any other lab test. You have a hypothesis, test it, and get data back, and now you can start drawing conclusions. But if you're drawing conclusions, if all you've done is having a hypothesis, you didn't bother to collect any data, and now you're drawing conclusions, come on. You know better.
Yeah.
And I think some people probably have gotten into certain fields because they'd prefer to just be heads down and not have to deal with a lot of people. And if that is where you naturally come from, you may not automatically do this kind of thing. So that's why we're suggesting it here. We're suggesting get engaged, have some tactical communication that you do on purpose, so that you can see the feedback. That's useful. Now, if you're somebody who's more naturally, social and demonstrative, I'm sure you're hearing all this going, anybody would know this. So, well, everybody doesn't know this. But it is important too that you don't just see things from your own viewpoint. Like, well, I thought it was really nice that I brought donuts. Sorry, nobody cared. Half the people are on a diet. It's not great, So make sure that you're doing things that are of value to others, so that when it comes time to cash in your chips, that you can say, okay, it's fair. I did this and this. You told me how valuable it was to you. Like, okay, the time has come. I really need your help. I need to call in you this favor. And that's fine. And when you're doing that kind of thing too, it is good to recognize that you're not putting a gun to anyone's head. What you're still asking, you're not demanding. It's like, I did for you, now by golly, you're gonna do for me. No, it's like, it's fine to remind them, hey, I did this and this for you. Now the time has come. I really need some help. Can you do this for me? And so even if you're the boss of somebody, sometimes we think when you're the boss, you don't ask, you tell. There is nothing that stops you as the boss from asking somebody to do something. It doesn't hurt anything. You don't lose any authority. And it's just treating people with kindness, and people respond to kindness. And when you ask somebody, hey, would you mind doing XYZ? It gives them a chance to say, well, that causes a problem that maybe you weren't aware of. You've already asked me to do ABC. I don't have any bandwidth right now for this, or I can do it, but I can't do it till next week, or that's fine. You want to have those kind of conversations. That's, again, because then you're getting new data that maybe data you didn't even know you needed. So it's very much helpful. And of course that serves you. If you're in a situation where you are pushing subordinates to the point of breaking and they can't get things done, that ultimately will impact you. Now, that will hurt your career as you can't meet your objectives. So again, it's still serving you to be nice to people and to ask rather than order.
It's interesting. There is a culture in some labs, let's say, where you don't tell your subordinate, you don't ask your subordinates what to do. You tell them, and in fact, it's a bit of a badge of honor to do that, to be able to do that, so that when you're that subordinate and then you grow up into, you're up to the next, you have someone under you, then you carry on, because it's actually seen as kind of a weakness to not do that. That's kind of an example of that downward spiral I was talking about earlier on, where it's just continuing the behavior that doesn't actually help, because there's nothing more likely to turn someone off from wanting to do well in your lab or in working under you, than to just be kind of what's the word? Unkind to them, for a better word. Yeah, well, that's what you mentioned. The word you used earlier was kindness. So again, it's about just tilting that spiral back up the other way and going, okay, well, it's not going to do it. It doesn't cost anything to be kind to people, to think about their point of view, to think about what they need, to ask them for, to do things rather than telling them to take their feedback and so on.
Yeah. And you used the word culture a moment ago, and so, we've got an international group of people that listen to the podcast, and you may be sitting there saying, well, maybe in America or maybe in the UK you could do it that way, but here in this culture, that's not how it's done. And so we're not in any way trying to impress upon you some other macro culture, but it's like just like with climate. Climate can be broadly stated to be certain ways, but there are microclimates. This valley's got a little bit different climate than the top of this hill. And culture is the same way. There's no reason that if you find something here useful, even if it seems like it would be counter to the typical broad culture you're in, you can create your own little microculture. Your group can operate a certain way if you find it's useful. Now, we present things to you, and we're not saying that this is the truth with a capital T and you have to do it this way. What we're saying, take what you can and the things that you find useful and put them into practice. Because at the end of the day, the stuff you learn about isn't really what helps. It's the stuff you actually put into use. That's what's going to make all the difference. That's what's going to impact your experience. It's going to impact your satisfaction, your accomplishment, your career advancement is going to come from the things you put into use, not just the things, yeah, I heard about that once, or I've heard about it 20 times, but still never done it. You don't want to put yourself in that space. So here's another way to think about this. At the beginning, I talked about service to others versus service to self. And if there's no versus there, well, maybe others isn't the right word. Maybe others is just, there's service to you and then service to all, service to everyone. And it takes that contention out of it. And I chose this particular slide because it's like, each of us is one of these little tiles. Now, these tiles are, there's only a couple different shapes, and there's a bunch of tiles here, but it all comes together. It all works as one. Some of them are different colors than others, and yet that makes it more interesting. It's visually interesting from a color standpoint, from a graphic standpoint, and that's just a sidewalk. Imagine if you put people into this. And what if you put really smart people, really well-educated people, and people that are really good at their jobs into this? Imagine what you get. And you get to be a part of that, and you get to benefit from it, and you get to be supported by it all if you get out of the versus mode. Did I hear something there, Nick?
No. I just said yes. I was just agreeing.
So the bottom line is, what we're seeking here is harmony. It's about service to the whole. How do we make everything work for the benefit of everyone? And I'm part of everyone. I don't have to give myself away so that it's good for everybody else. You don't have to be a martyr. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. That's not sustainable. I mean, if you martyr yourself for this, you literally are no longer a resource for anybody. So you stop serving others immediately. So, you don't need that. So it gives you, harmony is really the word. And I like the word harmony better than, say, balance. Because the problem with balance is something that happens in a static environment. When you think about balancing something, you usually have to hold still to balance it, right? But that's not life. Life is in motion. I mean, I'm talking to bioscientists. Nobody knows better than you that life is about motion. It's all about vibration. Everything is constantly moving, constantly changing. But with something like harmony is not bothered at all by movement. In fact, if we think of it in terms of music, we need it to move. If it wasn't for movement, there'd be no sound. And if there was no movement, we wouldn't move to the next note, to the next bar, to the next verse. And that's the part that we really like about it. It just, somebody can pick up an instrument who's skilled with it, and they can play a single note and just hold it. And it's just la. And how long will that last before you're bored, right? We want things to change. We want to be engaged with it all. So that is the takeaway from all this. If you want to serve yourself, serve the whole. You're part of the whole. It's going to work for you. It's going to work for others. Others are going to help you. It's an upward spiral, and you can start that spiral. You can be a force for good in that regard. And others, when they see it working, they'll pick up on it and start doing it too. Because again, we already noted, you're surrounded by smart people. They'll get it, and just show them by example. And in the end, you will serve yourself.
Yeah. So I've just written a note here about, there are, the summary of this for me is that regardless of where you are and what is going around you, what your professional situation is, or your domestic situation, or whatever, is regardless of what's going on around us, to orientate yourself towards, you're saying, to orientate yourself towards service to others, kindness to others, service to all. That's including you, really. Taking on others people's perspectives and stating your own requirements, regardless of what's going on. Then that will start to change the dynamic for you. Is that a fair summary?
That was a better summary than I would have gave.
I just didn't want to say it, but I thought that's what I thought as well.
No, that was great.
Okay, we have a few questions, so we'll just get through those. So it's mostly about situations, actually. So I feel constantly stressed in my lab. Everyone is out for themselves, and it's difficult to get help from anyone. What should I do in that situation?
Well, I think my first reaction to that is that really true? Are you absolutely certain that's true? Because maybe you just had, you've had some bad experiences, or maybe there was one person who was a real problem, but it's not necessarily everybody. So the first thing I would do is question whether that's a valid observation. And if you realize, you know what, maybe there's this one person actually is all right, or this one situation is pretty functional, you'll start to see some cracks in that dark view. But the other side of it is, if it's truly that way, if it's really like that, maybe you need to find a different lab to be in, because they're not all like that.
Yeah. Well, I would add a sort of middle step to that, because it could be that you're in a very small lab and there's not very there are not many places to go to try and find a different kind of, maybe there's a couple of people that are like that, but that's the whole lab. The next step for me would be try and make those connections out, in adjacent labs, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Find people there that can help and support you in whatever can help and support that you need, or you can start helping them and just sort of
that was where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's that way. Maybe you're making it that way.
Well,
why don't you try and make it another way and give it a shot? What's the worst that could happen? It won't be any worse than it was.
Well, yeah, and if you go back to my amazing summary there, it's regardless of where you are, start orientating yourself towards service to all, which is service to others and service to yourself.
Exactly.
So regardless of that, or regardless of what the other people in the lab are doing, start doing that. Keep doing that without expecting them to pay you back, and see and just make that the way you are. And then whether it's in this lab or in the next one, then you will derive the benefit. What you don't want to do is copy that behavior. If you think that is what's going on, you don't want to then close yourself.
Right. Don't meet the lowest common denominator.
Exactly.
The other thing about it is, if you end up being the only person who is helpful to others, would that be so bad? Would that not be an improvement in your life? So if I can't have it all, I don't want anything. That's not a great way to think.
I think that a lot of what goes on in some places anyway is that that 80s book that you said, what was it, Looking Out for Number One or something?
Yep.
And that mindset of that's the way to do it. I think that prevails in I don't know. It's not obviously not all over science, but there are places where there's pockets of that happening, and where that mindset is still there, and it's still a rat race essentially. And but the way to behave in that is just to turn the other way and go, okay, this is how I'm one of the people that's changing that dynamic, and
exactly,
and that'll start to change.
And at the end of the day, it'll change at the pace that it'll change. But one thing's for sure, change is ever present. So if you think, it'll never be different, come on, it's always going to be different. But whether it's going to change in 10 years or 2 days isn't really important. What's important is you get yourself pointed in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the steps to take will then reveal themselves to you. You'll see opportunities. But until you get involved, you won't see the opportunities. You may look at this right now and go, this sounds like a great idea. I have no idea how to implement it. The way to implement it is keep it in front of you and look for the first opportunity, and then make sure you do it. You got to take action. Even a small step is better than no step. Yeah. You can way overthink this.
Yeah. It's interesting that, isn't it? I just think that I was just laughing because there's so many of these things in this podcast, of these 60 episodes that are there. They overlap. Obviously, they're all different ways of looking at essentially the same thing. And the idea is about a way to not even behave. It's a way to be, I suppose, a way to conduct yourself that allows you to grow.
Right.
And if you are looking for ways to help other people, and just looking at, I don't want to be a doormat. Don't only look out for other people. Look out for yourself as well. Otherwise, you'll be trampled, if you like. But look out for, make sure that it's all. That's why Ken's saying service to all. So make sure you're looking out for yourself and other people. Then you're growing. If you choose the other way and copy the people that you think are holding back from you or just looking out for themselves, that's a smaller life to lead. You won't grow in that, certainly not as much.
Yeah, your career will not expand. Yeah, we're not telling you here to be saintly. We're telling, unless you want to be, we're not telling you not to be saintly, but we're telling you just the practical, this is what works as far as expanding your career. Whether or not you care about it from a philosophical or a moral standpoint or ethical standpoint isn't really the point. It's about, this is what works. So, we're just trying to give you tools that'll help you have a happier career.
Cool. Okay. So how about getting more money? Here's another question. The picture with the Penn and Teller with the pie. You see, the pie can keep getting bigger. But what about funding? There's only a certain amount available. That is a competition, and I just have to look out for myself. Yes or no?
Okay. Well, the first thing is, I did acknowledge that there are some zero-sum games. That does happen. But how about this? Is it really merely looking out for yourself that you're going for funding? And if you get it, somebody else won't? Are you the only person who will be benefited if that grant comes through? Chances are you're not. You're not the only person working on that project, probably. It may benefit the organization you work for, too. You start to see the possibilities of what it could do for a bigger group than just yourself. Now, maybe somebody else won't get the grant because you do. That is unfortunate. Well, I say unfortunately, that is just the way of the world. But it doesn't mean that you're going in there and killing the other guy so you can take the grant. You're not trying to destroy anybody. You're not trying to take them down. You make the best case you can. And one of the things that does for the others is it causes them to have to make the best case they can.
Exactly.
And if they fail to do so, hopefully they'll learn their lesson for the next time. So it's still benefited them. So you're not harming them that you got the funding instead of them. So that's a good attitude to have. First, it's the Hippocratic Oath thing. First, do no harm. And you don't know what benefit will come to others. And by the way, if you fail to get the grant, what are the learning points there for you? How could we have done a better job applying for this? Maybe we weren't a good fit for this particular funder, or as good a fit as we could have been. You will learn what's the best thing we can do here for our mission. And if you have other people with you, well, you now are serving a larger group to gain that insight and to get those skills and to put that experience into practice. So, I don't have an answer for how do you get every grant you apply for. Boy, oh boy, that'd be a $1 million idea, more than that. But it is a matter of, if you take every time you don't get a grant as a stake in the heart, you got to get out of that mode. You're gonna lose some competitions that way. That's just part of the game.
Yeah,
so
I guess
you got to be ready to handle that.
Yeah, so I guess the attrition here in whether it's getting grant funding or getting published or whatever, the attrition is what drives the standard up effectively. Because if it's a mechanism for driving of the system for driving the standard up.
Right.
So,
and hopefully you're in an environment where the standards are very high.
Yeah.
Good for you for making it into that realm. But now you need to earn your remaining in that realm.
Yeah, it's not a perfect system, but it's a system. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, you may in the course of your career help influence that system.
Yep.
So, but you will only be able to do so if you see the next opportunity to make it better, to do better yourself.
Yeah.
and take action on it, and then look for the next thing.
I mean, I guess that goes into another episode of how to deal with rejection, really. And and it's whether it's like you're looking for a job or looking for funding or looking for a publication. It's all about how do you look at it? Do you look at it in the downward way of, damn, he got that grant and I didn't, or do you look at it and go, okay, I have to do that. I need to up my game here, or I need to look at this in a different way, and then that serves the whole system.
Sure.
Yeah.
And maybe they're like, well, I applied for a grant and I didn't get it. Well, why did you only apply for one? That's not how this works, because you're demanding, well, I should get every grant I apply for. Come on, that's not realistic.
Okay, one last point on this is that you're talking about how to protect and expand your own interests, but what you mentioned during the podcast was service to all.
Mm-hmm.
And looking, when you're doing a grant application for funding or whatever it is, really, you want the job or the grant.
Mm-hmm.
But for everyone as a whole, it's important that the best application wins, or as far as as imperfect as the system is, as far as possible. So serving all doesn't mean you win every time. So that's a
And by the way, if that's your aspiration, awesome. Make sure that you are that.
Well, exactly. Be the genius, or be the genius. That's not a way to look at it. I mean, it encourages you
in your zone of genius.
It encourages you to stay at the top of your game, which everyone needs that kind of feedback to help them stay at the top of the game.
Yeah.
So okay.
And losing sometimes it tempers you. It strengthens you. It's worth it to try hard and lose sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. We have, unless anyone else wants to put in another question, we have one last question for here, which is, how do I take care of myself when my boss is selfishly demanding that I serve him by working long hours?
Well, there's a beautiful word in the English language that, as far as I know, it's in just about every language. That word is no. Sometimes you've got to say no. I can't do that. I don't have enough time. I will not be able to meet this objective if I don't get some relief here or get some extra resources. You got to start standing up for yourself too. And a thing about a person that's really selfish, truly selfish, they assume everyone else is that way too. Therefore, if you mirror back to them that selfishness, they will completely understand that. It will make sense to them. If you say, I can't do that because X, Y, and Z, and if you want me to do that, I have to have ABC, that is actually what they would expect from somebody who is competent and capable like themselves in their own estimation. So you gotta push back sometimes. You can't just lay down.
Yeah, and from a boss perspective, I would say that there's examine. Are you having it? Examine to this person who's asking the question. Does your boss know what the issue is here? Right? Mm-hmm. Are you feeding back to them that these hours are too much for you, that you have too much to do, or that this doesn't suit you, or whatever? Maybe you are, but if you aren't, then consider that one of the things I always say to people that are working under me is that I need to feel the pain that you're feeling, or I'll think everything's okay. And so you have to communicate to either, I ask people to communicate to either by telling me that, what the problem is, or by, if there's too much work to do, then it has to be that work, it sounds a bit stupid, but it has to be that work is not done, and I see it and I feel the pain of that work and go, why is that not done? Well, I just don't have time. I cannot physically fit that in. And so I either verbally or by demonstration, I need to feel the pain of what's going on below, so that I know what their needs are and how those are impacting my needs if I overwork them.
Right. The other thing about this too is you may be assessing their view as selfish, but maybe they're focused on what their objectives are. It's different if somebody is being abusive. They're yelling at you. They're backstabbing you. I mean, that's a different game. But I'm assuming you're just talking about somebody that's hard to work with, as opposed to somebody who is should be reported to HR.
Well, I mean, again, that's another way to say what I was saying there was that it's easy to look up and say that person has been selfish, they don't care about me, but if they don't know what the problem is, then they can't solve it, right? But the other side is there are people around, it could be that people are extremely pressured and they need, your boss is extremely pressured and they feel they need to put the pressure on you, right? Mm-hmm. And either acutely or chronically. And in that case, that's a negotiation about the more, if you push me past this line, I'm going to fall off the cliff and I'm not going to be able to do anything for you. So there's where it impacts your interest. Exactly. I'm not superhuman. But there are also labs where it's just expected that you work. And that's just, regardless of what the workload is or anything like that, it's just expected that you work ridiculous hours. In that case, so what's the case there? That you just...
Let's say, look for the advantages for yourself in that. Okay. How will it benefit me to really have my nose to the grindstone, my shoulder to the wheel right now? Yeah. Because especially if you're young and you've got the energy, well, maybe this is the time to get some experience under your belt. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, I realize that can make it hard on, your larger life, but you put that into perspective and say, this is the time. If there is ever a time in my life I should do it, now's the time. So, look to see, is there actually advantage in it? Maybe you've been overlooking that. Maybe you've been thinking, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not partying all the time. I actually do want to do this work. I want to get good at this. So, take advantage.
Okay. Just one last observation then about that is that, and especially that last comment from you there, Ken, brought home to me that we're talking about being aware of your interests and everyone else's and other part interests and doing what's needed to serve them, if you like. But the definition of their interest and your interest can be plastic. So you look at your interests in one way or another. And when I was in the lab, I really didn't like people telling me that I had to work, ridiculous hours on Saturday mornings and stuff. And I didn't look at it in the way that you looked at it. You just mentioned there, I just looked at it and I had a fixed view of what that meant to me and what that meant about the other person and so on. And that was rigid of me there. And so I wasn't serving the other person's interest, the supervisor's interest. I was really actually serving my own, even though I thought. Right. And so, it's interesting when you look at this that it's not as fixed as you think.
Sure, and then there's your short-term interest versus your long-term interest. You have to think about their interests. Even your own interests there's a competition going on. So, but what it comes down is be aware of it, be mindful.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your own interest is plastic, as in, is it the lazy you or is it the ambitious you as well? And which one do you want to serve? Yeah, okay, that's all. Right. Yet again, food for thought.
That's a wrap for this one.
Yeah. So thanks, Ken, for some wonderful insight, and thank you, the audience, for listening in, whether that be live today or on demand. We hope you found some benefit from the episode. You can look out for more live Happy Scientist episodes in the coming months. You can find them listed either on events.bitesizebio.com or on the Happy Scientist Facebook page at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Podcast. That's all one word. Until then, good luck in your research and goodbye from all of us at Bitesize Bio, including Mr. Miyagi here.
Bye.
Bye.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.